All right, everyone. I'm going to call this June 20th Sammamish Planning Commission meeting to order here in Sammamish City Hall Council Chambers. We'll start out with roll call for the commission, and I'll start on my right to give Commissioner Crandall a moment to sit down.
Mark Lewis.
Rituja Indapure.
Brooks.
Roshino Farrell.
Larry Crandall.
Josh Amato.
Thank you. Next is approval of this evening's agenda. Does anyone have any comments regarding this evening's agenda? Corrections or changes? Okay, by unanimous consent, the agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes from our June 6th meeting. Has everyone had a chance to take a look at that? And does anyone have any comments or corrections? No comments or corrections, so the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Next, we have public comment for non-agenda items. This evening, we're going to be talking about the Urban Forest Management Plan and have a presentation and some discussion and a public hearing about the Urban Forest Management Plan. If you would like to speak on something else other than the Urban Forest Management Plan, now's the time. Anyone?
With the chair's consent, we have a young gentleman who moved into our neighborhood just a week ago. He turned 7 years old today, and he told me a couple of days ago he loves trees. So happy birthday. His name is Ratik Boss. So I don't think he's watching now, but I'll show him how to do it on the machine.
Give him the link to YouTube. Yeah. He can be famous.
Karen Herring, 23684 Southeast 32nd. For the non-agenda item, I want to say happy birthday to that little guy, too. That was really sweet. Thank you.
Shout out to every small voice. We need to hear from you. My name is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish, and I do have a PowerPoint tonight, which we'll start at the beginning if we can. So my non-agenda comment is on rainfall. I did give you one black and white handout of the red thing I've got here. I just wanted to make sure that you knew I started looking at rainfall on the plateau in 2015. Sammamish Plateau Water had an operations manager for 30 years who retired, and they had collected rainfall all the way back to 1984. So this is a graph of that data. And if you look, you'll see the highest peaks are at 1996, 1997. And to find out the numeric data, you can look over on the left. I bolded those. So you'll see those were very wet years. There was 2 at like 60 inches and 2 at almost 50. And if you look at the very bottom, the average is about 44 and a half inches per year. So we did have some very high years. I also understand from King County, they thought 1990 was a big year some places, and that was 51 inches. So just wanted you to know, sometimes we get rainfall. A lot of times you have to do stuff for 100-year events, and you can even have 2 back-to-back 100-year events. So we've had some pretty rainy times there. Then also, CTAC has a NOAA website. This is from King County Hydrology. So if you just look at the green line, you'll see in 2015, the green line was really average. So 2015 was sort of an average year, and I remember I had a pretty brown yard that summer. And then in 2016, you'll see that's so high, it's not only over the average, it's over the average standard deviation as well. So 2016, we got a lot of rain. And then 2017 is the green line here, and you'll see it was about a standard deviation above the average, and then it went even above that. So I just wanted to give you that as a little bit of history. And then 2018 was above average, but it was within the standard deviation. That's the purple line. And then that red line, that's the current year. So if you haven't seen a lot of flooding or anything this year, it's because we really haven't had a lot of rainfall this year. It's actually been under average. And King County also does their water year from October through September rather than the calendar year, because it makes more sense to do that. And then the other thing I learned is King County has 2 automated rain gauges. This one's from over by McAuliffe Elementary. It's called 18Y Mystic Lake. And you'll see we had some very high years. There was a 2.4, a 3.8, almost 4 inches of rain in a single day. There's another one at 3.4. There's another one at 2.2. Those are your high peaks. And then you notice from about that time on, there really aren't high peaks anymore. And what I understand has changed is we don't get really high peaks and less rain anymore. We get lower peaks and we get more rain more often. So the red is actually more intense if you actually bring it up on the screen. And then the last slide here, the climate change predictors that I've heard from say we will have wetter winters and drier summers. So I just wanted to make sure you're apprised of that as we talk about things that might be related to what grows. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Mr. Stickney.
Hello there. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. Paul Stickney, 22626 Northeast Inglewood Hill Road. Just a little update on the Zaccoose Basin plan. In City Council's packet for Tuesday night, the final draft was in that packet. It was about 250 pages long. On Monday night, I attended Citizens for Sammamish, and we chatted about that plan had not gone through any review of either Planning Commission or City Council. There were a couple public open houses on the plan, but it hadn't come forth. And Wally, Pereira was at the meeting, and I asked if he'd seen a copy of it, and he had not. So I sent a copy to Wally. He had several comments and sent it in to me, and I forwarded it on to the council. And the council took it off the consent agenda and are going to plan a study session. And I learned at the meeting something that I was not aware of and was real good information. The City Council plans to make this plan, the Zaccoose plan, more than just a plan. It's going to be template for subsequent plans. So the council decided to involve the water district, which is good because there were some overlaps on whether there were sewer lines or some other things. So the long story short is Wally had some real good input to add. The council is going to have a meeting with the water district. And if all of you have already seen the plan, then I don't need to make this suggestion or observation. But if you haven't, if you get a copy of the council packet for Tuesday, and I don't always recall numbers, but for some reason I do this, that council packet was like 145 megabytes in size. It takes a while to sort of download. But in general, Wally, who knows way more about this stuff than me, said it was a good plan overall. He just had a few changes. So if that's of interest to you, you may stay tuned for when the City Council has its meeting on that and give any input in to the plan, because it's going to have further reaching effects than just this current plan. It's going to kind of set a stage for how subsequent basin plans are done, and I thought that would be interesting information to share.
Thanks, Paul. I would echo that it's worth taking a look at that. There's a lot in there, and you can get it right on your iPad.
I was not going to say a lot tonight, but the public speakers keep giving me clues, and knowing that Mary's from the Bozeman area and Paul knows where Bozeman is and Yellowstone Park, and you talked about weather and climate, the Bozeman Yellowstone area had snow today.
Not the case in Sammamish. All right. Any other non-agenda comments? Good. Let's move on to our main agenda item this evening, which is the Urban Forest Management Plan. We'll have a presentation, we will have a public hearing, and then we'll have some deliberation and discussion about the plan as presented so far.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Good evening, Planning Commission. Before we get started tonight, I have a few housekeeping items to address before we jump into tonight's presentation. But before I get to the housekeeping items, I would like to introduce a few folks. We have Ian Scott here with the Davie Resource Group, and we have Evan Fisher. And Evan, why don't you go ahead and stand up? Not to put him on the spot.
Welcome, Evan.
Joined us last month. He is a management analyst with the city. He just graduated last week from the University of Washington with an MPA. So now he's fresh off of school and here full time, and I am very happy about that. So I am introducing Evan because you're going to see a lot of him when we start talking about the implementation strategies in early 2020. So welcome, Evan. Nice to meet you all. Okay, now to the housekeeping items. In front of you, you'll find a hard copy of Exhibit 2. This is the same amendment matrix found in your packet materials. Additionally, we have provided the commission, as well as folks joining us tonight in the audience, an Exhibit 4. So if you haven't grabbed that, please do. Exhibit 4 are proposed amendments outlining minor edits and corrections to the plan found by Commissioner Endapure for your consideration during deliberation tonight. So these are, again, very minor corrections. Pending your direction, we'll be using Exhibit 2 along with any additional changes that you make this evening to update the draft UFMP, including Exhibit 4. This updated draft, inclusive of the amendments recommended by the Planning Commission, will be presented to City Council this fall. And as Mark mentioned, we'll be starting off with a very brief presentation of the proposed amendments, and we will follow that with a public hearing. Then, as a conclusion, at the conclusion of the public hearing, Planning Commission will deliberate and vote on a recommendation to City Council. Okay, since our last meeting, staff have taken all of your questions and comments and integrated those into the question and answer matrix. This is Exhibit 1 of your packet. These, along with a few staff changes from our further review of the draft plan, formed the proposed amendments you see in Exhibit 2. In general, the proposed amendments included minor edits and corrections to the plan, revisions and edits to the proposed goals and objectives, and adding clarifying language where appropriate. I do want to note that there has been some fantastic feedback provided by the commission as well as the public at the May 16th meeting that related more towards the implementation strategy. And thanks to a great suggestion by your esteemed chair this week, these comments have been highlighted in the question and answer matrix. The intent is to acknowledge this feedback so we can incorporate it into a draft implementation strategy, which will be back in front of you in early 2020, as I previously mentioned. With that said, let's go ahead and do a quick review of the proposed amendments. Okay, there are a lot of minor corrections, but in full transparency, we have outlined them here. Starting with Amendment 1, adding hyperlinks to the plan where appropriate. Examples include references to adopted plans and regulations, applicable websites, and the UFMP story map. Amendment 2, add Western Red Cedar to the benefit tables 1 through 5. This was actually recommended back in the fall, and I can't remember if this was the Planning Commission or the Parks and Recreation Commission. We missed it when we did that final draft we presented to you last month, so we wanted to capture it as part of an amendment. Amendment 3, add clarifying language to describe the size of trees that property owners are permitted to remove within a rolling 10-year period under the city's current regulations. Amendment 4, changing the title of a section heading. Amendments 5 and 6, correcting some typos. Amendment 7, updating the plan to include the referenced appendix and related documents. So in the plan that goes to City Council, we'll actually attach that appendice. Amendment 8, revise goal UA3 language. Amendment 9, we looked like we added an and there that we need to remove. Amendment 10, add a subheading under the municipal operations heading. 11 and 12, removing potential action could include and replacing it with objectives. And Amendment 13, adding a subheading under the community collaboration and engagement heading. 14, adding objectives under community goal C6. 15 is correcting a typo, and 16 is revising objective B under goal M6. I want you to make note of this one because amendment 17 in a way contradicts that. So amendment 17 on these next two slides, removing specific objectives under goal M6, including objective B, which, as I mentioned previously here, I suggest the commission revisit this proposed amendment during deliberation and clarify direction to staff on how they would like to see these objectives amended. Amendment 18 and 19, again, are just minor typos right there. So, very minimal comments. I mean, we did have some edits that we need to make to the plan itself, and some amendments to the goals and objectives. Again, were minor. So, again, we'll have a public hearing here from the community, and then pass this on for deliberation and hopefully a vote on a recommendation. After that, we will be back here on July 18th, and we will have another public hearing, deliberation, and a recommendation vote, and this will be on the associated comprehensive plan amendments. Once we can get through that, we will send both of those to City Council this fall for their review and approval and adoption. And then we can get on to the implementation strategies, which I know a lot of us are eager to do. So with that said, unless there are any questions, I will turn this back over to the chair to open the public hearing for comment on the proposed draft urban forest management plan.
I'm sorry, can I ask about 16 and 17?
Sure.
I didn't quite track when I read through this before, and then when you said it now. What is the conflict between the two?
So Amendment 16, the proposed amendment was to update the language. So
Yeah.
switch out preserve to consider.
Yeah.
But then when you go to Amendment 17, we are asking to remove B altogether. The proposal was to remove B altogether. So,
But it also includes other things
yeah,
as
it
well.
includes removing C and G.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. My only comment is that I think this is great because it looks like we're gonna get something done, and even if we could get it done early, that sounds good. And I've been reading a book, I can't remember the author, one is Zen and somebody else, but they're talking about elected and appointed officials should be the stewards for community health and stress and prevention of stress and things like that. And if we can steward this urban forest management plan through to the council tonight, I think we'll be doing a great service. Okay.
Kelly, can I just ask, Exhibit 2 on my screen is different than what's on this screen. Would you have a 17 on this screen that you've just shown us now is 16 in my packet? So it just maybe it just got switched. I just want to make sure that I'm looking at the right thing.
Oh, that's a good call. 16. Objectives.
What's number 1
Number
on your screen? And I
is-
asked that because on here,
Yeah, let's do that. Number 1 is the hyperlinks. Western
7
Red
is right,
Cedar
okay.
Up to urban forest. Oh, no, ASNI. Six, 7. Okay, so the first 7 are right. And eliminate the confusion there. 8. 9. Okay, 8, 9, and 10 are correct. They're matching up with what we have here. Potential, 12 potential, 13 at goals and objectives. Yep, 14 is misaligned. So it looks like 13 is right on. 14 and 15
15 and 16.
and 16. Which one did I miss? I can't either. I need my cheaters. Sorry about the text here. 14 is objectives. Huh.
But our packet is the correct one, the one.
Packet's the correct one.
correct
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
Okay.
this is the one we'll be voting on, not the
Okay, not
presentation.
the-
I
okay.
apologize.
Yeah, no problem,
that
no
confusion.
problem. Just want to be sure, but no problem at all.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
On the Amendment 16, my recollection from our last meeting is that we weren't necessarily looking at striking G, and then on B, I believe we discussed, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, we discussed the possibility of utilities perhaps doing a nicer job of cutting around rather than just removing trees. That was my recollection, and not to strike that entirely.
So as misnumbered on my slide.
Sorry,
Was your
it's-
recollection similar to what we have for Amendment 16 in your,
So for
or 15 in your packet, 16 on the slide?
15 on the packet,
Okay,
B, consider existing ordinances,
okay.
kind of aligns, I believe, with my recollection rather than striking it in Amendment 16.
Okay, perfect.
And then on G, my recollection is that I had asked for clarification on what was the reasoning behind 8 foot. Was there a reason we didn't go with 10 or 6 or what? And I think we were told that there wasn't necessarily a solid reason,
Yeah.
but that it was just the number that was chosen.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know that we had decided to remove it as a possibility of changing it later.
Okay. Perfect.
I'm going to make a note of that. Let's revisit it during discussion.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, then I'm going to open the public hearing on the Urban Forest Management Plan. Each person gets 7 minutes, essentially. Please remember to state your name and address as you start.
Hello, I'm Jan Bird. I live at 3310 221st Avenue, Southeast in Sammamish. And I already sent you my comments in advance. So the one part I'm not going to go over again are the web addresses, because you were needing web addresses, and I was trying to clarify the Stormwater Stewards, the Sammamish Community Wildlife Habitat Group, and the Native Plant Stewards. So it's easier in an email. So I'm going to start with, I think something that Kelly, I think, has an answer for me. And maybe I'm done with my comments, you can let me know. My concern was that the tree canopy information, I was back from 2015, and I understand why from reading the document. So the question, there was supposed to be an update in 2018. It just wasn't clear to me whether that's been done yet. And my other concern would be that obviously in 4 years, we're certainly going to be less than 48%, which is what we were starting at before with all the development that's occurred. So I think we kind of need to keep that in mind. Regarding your municipal goal number 5, which was enhanced processes for tree planting and plant salvage, and developing a staging site in the city to care for salvage materials. And like I said, I did send you 2 pictures so you know that there is, a place that has been provided for the native plant stewards. I don't know if this is what you had in mind, if you had something in mind bigger. The pictures are from May 1st of this year. There's actually a lot more plants in there at this point, so there's not a lot of extra room at this point, but we do have an area there, so I thought you ought to know what's already existing in the city. And regarding municipal goal number M6, it says review the tree ordinances every 5 to 10 years. I was concerned about, and I guess that's in your block 16, about develop incentives for development projects to retain the native trees, and it's been totally eliminated. And I don't understand why we would totally eliminate that, because as I told you from the resource materials we have, that native birds, they'll go blocks out of their way just to find a native tree, because the insects that they need for their young, they co-evolve with that particular tree. So why would we not try to do some incentive, if we can, to keep some of the native trees? So that's something I'd like to see put back in again, because native trees do have some special things that they can do for the environment that, other trees don't. And also, I'm glad to see you're talking about develop flexibility for the requirement of replacement coniferous trees, about the 8 feet. And when I was making comments about the original ordinance, I think we came up with that reason just because we wanted a decent-sized tree replacement. If you get rid of a 75-foot tree and you replace it with a 1-footer in a 1-gallon pot, that's going to take forever. So I think probably what you're trying to balance is what's the largest size you're able to find, and maybe it's hard to get the 8-foot. Maybe 5-foot is easier. So I guess we have to balance what's the easiest that's available, that also has the best chance of surviving, but also is the biggest we can get, because if we're trying to replace the services of a 75, 50-year-old tree, it's going to take a very long time if you are allowed to do a 1-gallon pot. So I think that's kind of the rationale behind that. So I hope that it'd be helpful if tree people can kind of tell us what is the most likely to succeed and what is most likely available, on the market. So if our tree people can kind of give us some help in that department, I think maybe we can, do a better job on that one. One thing I'm really pleased with about the part about establishing an arborist business license, because too many times you see people with unmarked trucks in neighborhoods taking down trees. So I think that'd be a great idea. Then you have your community goal, C6, develop a wood recycle program. Just like someone else, I forget which one of you it was, commented about that. I really hate the word wood. It just makes me think of, lumber as opposed to tree and plant material. It just kind of bothers me. So it seems like I'd change it back to tree and plant material. And one of the other issues I was hoping for a review of, maybe this comes more with the implementation phase, was to review our current ordinances and comparing them to what other cities have done, and other cities that are considered to have a strong program. What kind of tweaks do we need to make it more effective and easier to manage? It's mentioned that Bellevue has a specific goal for their urban forest canopy, and Kirkland is the only city with an overarching urban forest management plan. But how do their ordinance compare? And Lake Forest Park, they've had a lot of fairly, I think, good ordinances for years. How do we compare to them? So that would be real helpful, I think. And then my biggest concern overall is lack of staffing to carry the plan through. I think we do need a city arborist who can coordinate with the other city departments. Like I said, this is a city that always seems to pride itself on having a lean staff. But if you have lean staff, that means you're reacting like a lot of what was said in here about how the trees are taken care of. It's more reaction as opposed to doing some long-range planning. So I think that's really important to add that duty on top of someone else with their existing job. That's just nuts. Things just aren't going to happen. It's just going to, like I said, lay on a shelf somewhere. And also, it'd be great if we could connect with Forterra to be a Green Cities program. Redmond's been doing it, Snoqualmie, Issaquah has just joined on with them. and they could help manage our ongoing urban forestry management plan, help us develop achievable goals. They do restoration tracking. This is basically from your report. Shared visions, long-term plans, and a community-based stewardship program. And they just have a long history of doing this. And I think if we had a city arborist combined with the Forterra program, I think we'd have a very strong urban forest management plan. And we can really, start moving forward, making progress. But short of that, I think it'd be rather ineffective. So I hope that we can encourage City Council to go for that model. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Anyone else?
Good evening. Sharon Steinbus, 24933 Southeast 14th Street, Sammamish. I'm going to basically ditto what Jan said about Forterra. What are other cities in the region doing with regard to their urban forest management? There are several regional urban forestry organizations that provide services to help cities protect, maintain, and develop their urban forests. The Sammamish Urban Forest Management Plan mentions a couple of these organizations, and there is one which I'd like to call to your attention, the Green City Partnerships, which is run by Forterra. You may be familiar with Forterra. Forterra started as a land conservancy and has worked with communities around the Northwest to permanently protect over 275,000 acres of land, including urban green space, parks, and community gardens. The Hazelwolf Wetlands, which borders Sammamish on the east near Soaring Eagle Park, is one of these green spaces that is currently owned and protected by Forterra. So Forterra is basically already on our, working with Sammamish. Forterra also helps cities manage their urban forests through the Green City Partnerships. Forterra started working with Seattle in 2004 to create a 20-year strategic plan to help Seattle manage, restore, and maintain the city's urban forests. The Green City Partnerships have been so successful that since then, 14 other cities in the area have joined the Green City Partnerships. And Forterra has gained experience and a toolbox of resources. Forterra works with local nonprofit groups and community-based stewardship programs. Just so you know, the local members of the Forterra Green City Partnerships include Burien, Des Moines, Everett, Kent, Kirkland, Puyallup, Redmond, Seattle, Shoreline, SeaTac, Snoqualmie, Tacoma, Tequila, and recently Issaquah has joined. The Green City Partnerships share these three goals: improve the quality of life, connections to nature, and enhance forest benefits in cities by restoring our forested parks and natural areas. Galvanize an informed and active community, and I think this part is especially important for Sammamish with their lean budget, ensure long-term sustainable funding and community support. Besides having a full-time arborist or forestry expert on staff, Sammamish needs an expert partner to help manage their urban forests. I would ask for you to consider joining up with Forterra in the Green City Partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Anyone else?
Karen Herring, 23684 Southeast 32nd Way. I'd like to ditto all of those folks and probably Mary, who may or may not come up next, but I ditto her anyway. For number 12, for the salmon habitat, thank you for that. That is so important in this city, and all cities, actually. I wanted to talk a little bit about the wild nature of the trees that live here now. I live in a wooded property with all manner of animals, fish. Well, we don't have fish up here, but, bugs, bees, birds. And what I've noticed is development is rampant in my neighborhood. It has already cut everything down, and now we're building homes. So the trees rolling down the street on these giant trucks aren't happening anymore, but they're gone. So what I'm losing are red-tailed hawks, flickers. I did have an eagle soar over my head when I went out the door the other day, so that was a big plus. I don't see owls anymore on my front deck. I don't see a lot of the nature I came here to live with. It's gone because it's been removed by the development all around me. Their nature is gone. So their feeding places, their nesting places are missing. I'm just one little yard amongst those. And I don't want to see that happen all over our city. So when we do tree retention, let's retention all the big trees that have life in them. And let's make sure that when we study, we see the life that's in them, which are the nests, the bugs, the birds, the bees, the things that Jan talked about, all those things that can't feed their young because you took the bugs out of the tree. I think I had one more thing. When you are developing all around, you also create newcomers to properties that don't belong. And they are in the form of rodents, and they're looking for food, and they're living now in places where we don't want them. So now we've added a new problem. And I want you to maybe sometime take a look in a park and go into the woods, not on the trail, and see the snags, the shrubs, all the things that have broken and fallen in there that are still alive. They have bear dens, raccoons live in them, all manner of other animals that you don't see because they're afraid of you. But let's not be afraid of them. Let's protect them. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen. Anyone else? Mary?
My name is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. I'll start with what Karen Herring had finished with. When people have trouble with trees or hazard trees, they get a permit, they remove them, and they're gone. That actually causes a lot of problems. And I learned about snagging trees from Mary Johnson, who's not here, but I think she sent in things, and the lady sitting over there in a grove. And snagging trees are where you top them or you take parts of them off, but you leave the stump and the trunk and you leave the dead wood because that provides a lot of things to do. You'll also hear from arborists that cottonwood trees are horrible, awful, terrible trees. They should all be taken out. Well, there's a lot of them in the city and they grow where there's water. And if you start taking them out, they don't suck up the water anymore and you'll have other problems. So I think we need to come up with innovative new technology treatments that you could add to your goals, that we would use those for managing the trees in your property and in your neighbor's property. I want to speak to that a minute. 51% of the canopy is in private areas, and if you're just going to let neighbors duke it out with each other and a neighbor against the homeowners association, everybody wants the trees removed, they want it flat, they don't want to pick up after them, they want the view. We have to have something that says there's a value to the forest and the connectedness, and you, your neighbor, your HOA, the community you live in, and the neighborhood next to you has a meaning, and somehow that the city purports that going forward. And that means you are going to have to do work in private areas, and you are going to have to work with people, because literally you can't do it one tree at a time, one property at a time. That's not managing the forest. Also for Jane Garrison, who was on the Planning Commission, she said, you know, the urban forest isn't just trees, it's the whole ecosystem around it. It's the mushrooms, it's the soils, it's all the things that grow in the soils. The trees even talk to each other. And I don't see that kind of in the plan, so I think that needs to be in there somewhere. One of the biggest things is, if you look on the map, the whole plateau isn't flat. You have some green areas where there's very steep slopes and there's hazard areas. And I believe that I read somewhere that if you're around Pine Lake or Beaver Lake, the tree retention ordinance is at 80% versus the other percents. But there's nothing given to the steep slopes, landslide hazard areas, erosion hazard areas, which are all geohazards that are supposed to be recognized, identified, and protected per the GMA. So what's happening is those older areas, which is right by Englewood Road and right by Lewis Thompson Road, those lots already exist. If people own them, they're buying 2,500 square foot lots and going to take all the trees off, get a reasonable use exception and build. And then when they take those trees, you'll have wind throw and other things that'll happen with the other remaining trees, and you're losing your forest connectedness there. So we really need to do something. I know that the comprehensive plan has things for the critical areas and environmentally sensitive areas, and something needs to get added to this urban forestry goals and policies to say that there are special areas in the city that need extra special protection, higher percentages. They need more replanting or recovery that the trees would be protecting. You just can't get rid of them. So I don't know the words that you use for that or which things you put it in, but it is in the stormwater comp plan. It's in the regular comprehensive plan, and it needs to be in this comprehensive plan, and they all need to knit and protect those areas, because through the GMA, you are supposed to identify them. Steep slopes are supposed to limit development, and when you take off trees on steep slopes over and over and over, you have landslides and erosion problems, and it's a safety hazard. So I wanted to speak very strongly to that, and if Mary Johnson were here, she would also speak to that, and I know she's written in as well. So I did send in a thing about a cottonwood tree in Idaho that had been turned into a library because somebody decided that even though it was a hazard tree, so you might want to read that. It's a fun article. I did send in Barbara Robbie, also cannot make it tonight. I had used her feedback on the 16th. She's the one that lives by George Davis Creek. A lot of trees are dying. There isn't really a solution for her. I think one of the reasons the trees are dying is the way that we manage stormwater. She can't actually do stuff in her creek because the city defined it as a creek buffer, but she can't get any help, and she's really stuck. So I think that should be part of the public hearing, and I sent it in as well. When Ian Scott had first come, we had talked about having a leaf on and a leaf off canopy assessment. If you look at 2017 versus 2015 aerials for our city, you'll notice they look quite different because the 2015 one is a leaf off one in the winter. If we're going to do another canopy assessment, as Jan Bird brought up, I really think we should try to do a leaf off assessment. And again, if we're 48% canopy and half of them are evergreens, that means in the wintertime we're only 24% canopy. And if you say, oh, Mary, there's more green trees than that, fine, let's just say it's 2/3. It's still only about 32, 33%, so a third. And when you lose all that, you're getting more stormwater impacts and more risks in landslide hazard areas. So I wanted to bring that out. Also, I know from all the traffic stuff they're doing, if you have tables and charts and you don't have dates on them, you get reamed by council and the public. So every time that you have a table, chart, or figure, it needs to be clear what that data was from, because these reports from consultants are so good, they live around for 10 or 15 years, and people need to be able to look to those and really know what the data is from, and the analysis that was usually done later, what it's from. So Mary Johnson, I know, has written in that feedback because she sent me a copy of her stuff because she's at a neighborhood meeting that she had to go to tonight, and I think you should consider that. And I think I've covered almost everything else here. Let me just glance. Native growth protection easements. I think somewhere in the goals and policies, it needs to say the city isn't just protecting trees, and it isn't just buying land to put it in conservancy. There are places where you can do easements for native growth. So someone who doesn't want to develop, but they want to get something for their lot, and they want to get help removing blackberries or establishing native plants or something or other, that there could be money or grants that they could get from the city to do that. And then because that's a gift of public funds, they would give back an easement on their property saying that it would stay in that. And a native growth protection easement is in the King County Code. It's been in there since 1998. And a really good example of it is Tlingit, right by George Davis Creek. Their open space is that. And if you look on their plat, it says all the stuff that people can't do. And the city didn't have to buy that property to do it. So I think we, the last thing is there are places where trees have been taken down and there have been huge penalties up to $150,000. That money should be set aside for restoration of abandonment and abatement. It shouldn't go to fixing roads somewhere. And then Jan Bird also talked about restoration. There is nothing in our code that talks about restoration periods. We definitely should have restoration. Otherwise, people plant, the next buyer comes in, and then everything is gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Next is Mr. Stickney.
Good evening again, Planning Commission. Paul Stickney, 22626 Northeast Inglewood Hill Road. Appreciate the opportunity to chat. These comments aren't going to be real long, and you'll probably be sort of expecting some of it, but maybe I have a little bit of a different twist in how I share the information. I suggest that you add a, placeholder in the plan for the council or the city to establish flexibility from the standards of this plan to 5% of the land area in the city, which is those lands that are zoned R12 and higher. So town center, the other centers. And my intention there is that in those, I'll speak to that, suggestion. It's not a motion because I can't make one. So I suggest that you add that placeholder to add that to the plan at a appropriate future date. And speaking to the reasons why is, if the right types of optimal uses that our community is short on, housing affordability for many economic and demographic groups over cycles of life, economic uses that people would want and use here, optimal critical mass for transit, and the counterintuitive part is those types of uses that are increased in those areas would allow a counterbalance to have less intense use of types of housing, in particular, that we have oversupplies of as a community. So the trade-off is that in the 95% of the area that is going to be redevelopment or for future development, there could be less, which is an advantage for the urban forestry plan. I agree with all the speakers. I love trees. I love the forest and would like to have it improve the overall ambiance and the environmental function in the city. And in the plan, I don't have the numbers precise, but it is about 95.5% of the land in Sammamish is zoned R1 through R8, and about 4.5% is zoned R12, and up to R18, and then commercial and centers. So in summing up, I would say constructing flexibility that would put land use first in 5% to optimize, and that's the key word, not to do things that are not beneficial to the community, but that are optimal for the community, and then put in trees and landscaping and all kinds of things based on the right land use. But in the other 95% of the city, I think the trees and the environmental take lead, and behind that is the use of some more single-family homes, et cetera. So again, my summary would be to consider not the entire goal. There'd be no way to, vet it all out and have it written and get it, but in a subsequent update to this plan, allow flexibility for zones that are R12, R18, commercial, and centers in the future for the reasons I've outlined. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I believe that's everyone, correct? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing. Next, if someone could make the motion that's been recommended, and we can have some discussion. Oh, it's on the screen. Very nice.
I'd like to move we recommend to the City Council the approval of the Urban Forest Management Plan as drafted in Exhibit 3 and further amended by the Planning Commission in Exhibit 2 of the June 20, 2019 packet materials.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded to recommend this plan, plus the Exhibit 3 and Exhibit 2 to the City Council. Is there any discussion or comments? I I'm assuming there might be a few. I'd like to just start out myself and make a couple of quick comments. Just to say again, thank you to staff and to Ian and the folks at Davie who've worked on this. I know that this has been a long time worked on, even before my involvement. And I know there's a lot of people excited really about the implementation portion of it. So thank you, nicely done. I would also just remind everybody, including people up here and others, that as we said all along, the plan as it is right now is step one, defining the borders. What we're going to do next, as it's stated in here in 2020, is define implementation strategies. So it's okay to talk about implementation strategies, of course, but we need to kind of keep a parking lot of those so that we keep track of them and then take action on them later. This is really just the long wanted plan to get the process started. Okay, so maybe we'll start just down at the south end here with Josh and see, do you have any comments or anything, Josh?
Yeah, this is probably the more appropriate time for what I brought up previously, but I think we should clarify what we were looking at in Amendment 16 and 15. We might want to revisit that altogether so we are all on the same page about what we had in mind that day and come up with what we actually want to recommend.
And I do want to note, I have corrected the presentation. I found my mistake, so we are in alignment with Exhibit 2. Yay.
Real time, very nice.
Yes.
Go ahead,
I think I agree with Josh, and I think we need to keep M6B in Amendment 16, and instead of saying preserve, I think we say consider. So we do need to consider the existing ordinances, exemptions for utilities to control costs. So I think that definitely should not be struck out. So I'll just speak to that. I don't remember why we had removed the other two, C and G. I don't know if it was already because we were considering it some other place, but if maybe Kelly, if you can remind us, or
Yes, the particular reason why these were proposed to be removed is that maybe it was getting a little bit too detailed, and I think it was in regards to, like for example, the I really should have brought my cheaters today, the 8-foot height limit, and I think we started to talk about that a little bit more, and so it was proposed that we maybe remove some of the objectives that maybe were a little too specific. But again, as I think I mentioned prior to the meeting starting, I didn't want to make an assumption, so I added this amendment in here for discussion. So if we need to keep those objectives, fantastic, let's do so. And we can cross out Amendment 16 if that makes sense, or we can relook at this a little bit more.
I'll just add that my recollection of the tree height one was, we discussed where the number 8 came from, and no one really had a specific reason they recalled. And we talked about the fact that 8-foot trees can be difficult for a homeowner to manage. So perhaps, as was suggested, a 5 or a 6-foot number would be fine. I don't think we really ever intended it to be
Struck out.
that it's wide open for anybody to plant saplings necessarily. So that's what I recall about the conversation. I don't particularly recall anything about the C and why that one got struck. Maybe someone else recalls that one.
I thought C was very specific again to implementation, and maybe that's why that got removed, because it's again develop incentives for development projects. Again, I don't think it should be just development projects that we incentivize to retain native trees. It could be existing homeowners too, or existing open spaces. So I think that's why we probably removed that.
excuse me, back to the 8-foot thing. Somehow it's in the back of my mind that's something they use in the industry. So I was at a tree protection during construction, and it's really not so much the 8-foot is manageable replacement of the tree. And the most important thing is if they come with burlap over the root balls, remove the burlap. And there was a couple of cases where this development was going on, these people were hired, and they had 100 trees, and they just put them in there real fast with the burlap on. So there's a lot of things. This is a pun, but maybe it's important. We got to be careful getting into the roots, but we want to make sure we protect the roots at the same time. So I can live without that 8-foot thing. And I kind of agree with Ratusha on the other ones. Maybe now we're in the weeds or not in the weeds, but.
So I think on the 8-foot item, we're looking at potentially an action in the future. This is a plan to develop a plan in the future. So we're just keeping that on the table, right? We're not changing anything.
Yeah, and I do want to note, you know, G does say develop flexibility. So, 8-foot is what we have now, but maybe we need to further look at that and look at other, as we get into the implementation strategies, maybe this needs to be looked at a little bit closer, and what defines that flexibility.
Right, so maybe you're suggesting we remove the 8-foot, the kind of that component of it. It's just, let's look at the replacement requirements for maybe both coniferous and deciduous trees. We just need, that's more of a kind of rubber hits the road type of topic, I think, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, is that how you're interpreting it?
As far as the, I think that the looking at the regulations around the utilities, I think they just need to be synced up, right? I think we want to maintain that on both. And the other one was development incentives. Right. I think that's it.
Mark?
On the 8-foot tree, I'll weigh in on that too. I think we should take that out to allow that flexibility, because the last time I went to look at trees, an 8-foot tree could be a pretty mature tree for a particular kind of tree and very, very, very expensive, whereas an 8-foot tree for a tree that's 30 or 40 feet at maturity is a lot less expensive. So that's another consideration to keep that flexibility.
Anything else on this? I would say that what I heard in the discussion is perhaps we could just take out the modifications of number 16. Is that the right number now?
Yes.
I don't want to say it wrong.
Your packet's right. And the screen's correct.
Yeah, because we would be then leaving the language change for utilities, and we'd be leaving the language as originally proposed to allow flexibility for the 8-foot. And then the only other thing is the incentives to develop projects that retain native trees. I mean, I frankly, I'm not sure I want to navigate through an amendment to change that one. It's pretty generalized anyway. So I think it would be reasonable, if you'd consider it, to just remove this the modifications that are proposed here in number 16 and leave the plan as it was written, which would be that kind of middle column, language in the middle column. Would that get us where we're trying to get to?
Just quick question on that. So for G, develop flexibility, we're talking specifically about coniferous trees. Is that what that was intentional?
There we go. When it came to that particular topic, that came out of the stakeholder discussions, and it was actually city staff who were remarking that the size of an 8-foot conifer, the box and the planting materials were cumbersome for even city staff to handle, and they had a hard time imagining that the general public would be able to install trees of that size. So that's why we kind of made that note on the detail for coniferous. But I think it's, if, down the road, if you're looking at the tree ordinances, maybe redefining that in a way that works with nursery availability, something like that. So whether it's conifer or deciduous trees, that discussion should happen, as part of an ordinance that you would revisit every 5 to 10 years.
Right.
So let's just clarify, maybe make sure we all have the same level of understanding, and if I don't, that'd be good to find out. Right now, we have something in our code or some of the requirements that says that coniferous trees shall be replaced with an 8-foot specimen.
Right.
And what this is saying is that you're recommending that as we move forward, we develop flexibility around that existing requirement to perhaps change it to 6 feet or some other version.
Right.
Okay. So if we want to do that, someone should make a motion to amend to remove 16.
I'd like to make a motion to amend, to remove Amendment 16 from the current motion.
I second that.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
No.
It's been moved and seconded to amend the main motion by removing line item 16 from the proposed Exhibit 2.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion about that? Okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That amendment passes, so that we'll call that Amendment 1. Okay, other items having to do with either these amendments in Exhibit 2, the further amendments in Exhibit 3, and then we do have
Exhibit
Patricia's
4,
list
yeah.
here as Exhibit 4.
Were you still going south or from the
Yes,
south?
that's a great idea.
Okay, moving northward, then I don't know where we are, but it's not so much an amendment. I was just hearing from the public, and I really appreciate what we heard tonight. And one of the things that are in here is informing the community of educating them. It's in there. I think this is a great idea. And one of the things that came to my mind as I heard everybody speak, I wish everyone who lives in Sammamish would have the ability or have the opportunity to read Peter Wolden's The Hidden Life of Trees and Jill Jonas's The Urban Forest. And so maybe later on we can get some foundation to buy 20 or 30 copies to kind of have them out there for people to share, because a lot of things we're talking about and we hear from the public are in those 2 books. So that's all.
Thank you, Larry. Rasheen? Eric? Or do you want me to skip you and come back?
No, it just keeps me from saves me from writing, I guess. So many of the public comments we heard tonight seem to be of the category of kind of the implementation phase. Is that right? Because I don't want to leave any of them behind,
Yeah.
and I want to make sure that we have these things in there. And it's sometimes a little hard to find that line between high level and low level, because they all kind of dovetail a little bit. But I just want to make sure that we carry those forward. The next couple comments are going to be kind of connected to our experience with the shoreline deal. And there was some I'm just wondering if there's any underlying laws and regulations that are out there at state level or other levels that are going to prevent us or provide challenges to us implementing any of these things when the rubber hits the road, because we've heard that there are some of those exact things that are keeping us from really truly realizing our goals that are set in these comp plans. And I've been told that we should look at those as aspirational, but I don't really think that that's our intent here. I think we're trying to set goals that are achievable, not aspirational. And so, and that's the way I'm looking at these, as things that we're going to really do. So are there any other things like, that and maybe you don't know that, but things that would be challenges to us getting this to actually come to fruition?
Yeah, two things come to mind. One is the fee in lieu option, where essentially we're proposing to explore, setting up a program so that if you're or doing something on your property and you could pay into a fund to have the forest preserved or helped in another part of the city. It's a really powerful idea, but like as the public comments noted, these are all private properties, and it's the city administering public, like handling public funds or taking money from one property owner and giving it to another, maybe as a tree. So that's definitely a hurdle that I think is going to take some time to work through, but it's worth exploring the legality of being able to do that, because again, majority of the Sammamish's trees are on private property, and the other hurdle is that the majority of Sammamish trees are on private property. So a lot of people come with the fair use of their property, and I think that's where education plays a big role in that, in helping people recognize that the trees that they own, as the condition of ownership, they're really more of stewards to the trees on their property, and that they're still a community asset. It's not okay to dump in a stream that passes through your property. It's not okay to destroy a tree on your property. I would say that we'd want to get that same kind of message out there. But both of those tend to be, in the long run, the sort of larger hurdles towards urban forest management.
Thank you. And again, just to reiterate, I think we all share the opinion that it's important. The next step is super important, and that it's the only step that's truly going to lead us to this, right? And we can have all these things that we want, and if we don't have policies or rules and regulations that lead us to these, then we're never going to get here. So, and we have seen that example on other aspects of our comp plan, which I think is disappointing to the public. So let's move on with it.
If I may comment, Eric, or Commissioner Brooks, more formally, the comments that we heard tonight from the public that tend to lean more towards the implementation strategy, we will be capturing those and continuing to add those comments to the question and answer matrix, highlighting them. When we get to the implementation strategy plan and what we present to the Commission for your review, we'll make sure that we include this question and answer matrix in that packet, and that we tie and note reference appropriately where we have addressed that in the draft implementation strategy, because we are receiving some fantastic feedback and some really great ideas that we as staff want to ensure get put into that draft and presented to you and to the City Council for adoption.
So I can just tag onto that for 1 second. There were a few instances, both in written and in the comments this evening, that I think are hard for us to suggest amendments, but are worthy of follow-up.
Sure.
So just to mention a couple, I think it was Mary Johnson in the written comments. It seemed to me she had a number of corrections of numbering and those sorts of edits that seemed worthy of at least spell checking.
Yes, and I did add that to Exhibit 4.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
Good. Oh, that's there, okay.
I snuck that one in. That was a good
and I
comment.
believe there was also some comments from her and maybe someone else about making sure that all the charts and tables were properly labeled, referenced, dated, whatever is appropriate for that.
We can definitely add that as well.
Yeah, again, not something we really can handle from here at this point, but would be worthy of a run through.
Sure.
And then Jan mentioned both written and verbally the web addresses. That might be
Absolutely.
worth, although those will obviously change over time, but it'd be nice to have them right for a little while anyway.
We agree.
Okay. Retuja.
All right. So thank you again, staff, for putting together a wonderful packet. Ian, for working on this for years, it seems like. I think based on the public comment we've received and also input from the general public, I think this topic is very important to people of Sammamish, residents who live here. And, I think actually expanding urban forest is also mentioned in our vision statement for the city. So I think this is the right path that we're going on. I think it's a little late, but I think, it's better to at least have the plan than not have one at all. So I'm really excited to go ahead on this. So I had a few questions. Page 24, table 13. I know there's an amendment to change the Tehani Park from 7 acres to 64 acres, so thank you for fixing that. I was just wondering if you could give us an idea of, how does, this big park, which probably 7 acres is really something that is usable and the rest is sort of wetland and a bog. What are the steps in which, that can get converted to a preserve or something that we can save it for future generations?
So the steps in doing that, I think that's direction that needs to come from our city council. I don't believe we have a formal process for that. I know the Tehani master plan is currently, Parks Department is currently working on that. So I think that's feedback that needs to be provided to the council for consideration. And I think the avenue to do that is through the master plan process. But how we define our parks, I think the first resource we would want to go to is the Pro Plan. The Pro Plan does define parks. I do believe Kalani is in there. So I think we need to look at that. But again, I think that's a conversation that has to happen at the council level. I think, yeah.
Great, thank you.
There's no easy answer to that.
No worries. Page 26, table 17. There is a column for potential development area, and I was just wondering, the numbers, what was the thought process behind, or what were the mechanisms in deriving that particular number?
I'll respond on behalf of Kelly. Yeah. When I was working with the city staff, I put out that question, floated the question, do you think you could come up with a number from the GIS department of the potential development acres? And they took a look at that, so they overlaid it against, I think it was the critical areas and other places that wouldn't be developable, and then it came up with that number. But I think we could get you a stronger answer by asking around back into the city as to how they ran the query.
And I think for this too, since it was probably done in real time or as close to, that would be good to note it somewhere that this was done in 2018, or and then just understanding what criteria, because I think where I was coming from was, is it just lands that has not been built on? I don't know, for steep slopes, for example, is that still considered buildable land? Was that considered or not? So I was just trying to understand what all was included in that.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have a clear answer for you. So it's a great question.
Yep.
We can go.
I mean, it's not going to stop us going ahead today. I just wanted some clarification.
Yeah. Actually, in the under the tree canopy and development, where that note is made on page 26, it does acknowledge the date of 2018.
Okay. Yes, it does.
And as Ian mentioned, I think what they did is they queried areas that can be developed like sensitive areas, critical wetlands, steep slopes, areas that are already developed, and they came up with an estimate. It's not the exact number. The city is currently working on providing data to King County for the buildable lands report, or the urban growth capacity study, as it's now referred to. That will not be complete until mid-2020. So if the council is comfortable with, or sorry, the commission is comfortable with this number, this is the estimate at the time, because we won't get a more firm number until middle of next year.
Okay, thanks. Table 18, so there's again calculations here. Again, for this I was specifically interested in knowing, because it kind of gives us I think a worst case scenario. So does this sort of take into consideration what the minimum tree retention policy is, or does this just assume that, I think it says every 10 years, 16 to 24 trees are removed, and is that just the calculation that goes in, or are you also assuming that whatever retention percentage that we have is also getting
Sure. No, so we didn't. We stuck to just the permits that, like, permitted to remove trees on property outside of a development permit. So as I understand it, the tree retention or minimum tree requirement is in a development application, and this was to suppose that if homeowners wanted to proceed with removing trees as they're allowed to, then that would sort of bookend what the potential change in canopy could be.
Okay. Page 52, it's a result from the survey, and I just didn't understand it very well. So if you look at page 52, it says, how often do you encounter? So for example, it says trees blocking the right-of-way 62%, and then it says never. So I think what I was a little concerned was about the trees in poor health. It says 45% have never encountered trees in poor health. So I was just like, are 55% saying that they've always encountered trees in poor health?
Yes, and I think what's we were going for there is that the average person isn't necessarily qualified to identify the problems that are with trees, but when they go out their door every morning, do they drive down the street and go, wow, all the trees in my neighborhood look great, or oh no, every day I see there's these the western red cedars are going into decline, and so maybe they're blaming it on a disease, maybe it's a biotic, maybe it's an abiotic factor, whatever the reason is. We like to keep that. We propose that question as kind of a broad brush to say, are people noticing health issues in the tree population?
Okay, thanks. Page 55, goal number 2. I just wanted to understand, it's very specific to fuel loading in the urban areas or urban forest, and I wanted to understand what that meant.
Yeah, this is at the edges of my expertise as far as fire management. That's not something that I study, but I get some exposure to. And when it comes to urban areas, it can be dead trees in people's yards that there's no rush for them to manage, so they don't, and that's fuel load. It can be grass and brush. It can be debris. In Sammamish, it may be that this is the topic of defensible space. Perhaps they're keeping all of their wood piles and buildup of debris right around their homes, and makes it difficult to defend. So does it help?
Yeah,
illustrate it a bit?
Since we had just looked at the shoreline code last time, and we're talking about refueling boats and things like that.
Yes. Okay.
I just wanted to know. Or does this, like big propane tanks, does that come under fuel? I think so. This is completely different.
No, it's the natural debris that winds up in people's yards. It's potential fuel loading for fire.
Okay. And my last question is around municipal goal 4A. It just says operational objectives, and I just wasn't sure what that meant.
Oh, okay. Yeah, operational objectives, they can vary, but a lot of that may be just having a tree planting plan for 2021. How many trees are we going to plant that year? How much tree removal work is the city going to conduct in the parks? When we pose those questions today with the city. They're reactive to it, so they know what needs to be done because they learned about it yesterday. But if, as the plan moves forward, the city should have an increased awareness of what kind of tree care workload they have, and these would be the operational objectives to help maintain the city's managed urban forest.
Okay. That's all I have. And then should I be proposing for Exhibit 4 to be added on? So I would like to move that we add changes made in Exhibit 4.
Move to amend the main motion.
Okay, move to amend the main motion to add changes mentioned in Exhibit 4.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to further amend the main motion by incorporating the proposed changes in Exhibit 4. Is there more discussion about these? I quickly kind of read through these, so I think I'm pretty familiar with those, and maybe some of you did as well. Any questions or discussion about these? Okay. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Aye.
Motion to approve amendment number 2 passes. Okay, Ratuja, did you have anything further?
I am happy.
That's why we're here. Mark? Okay. I didn't have anything that would be amendable, but I wanted to make a couple of comments. One is I'd like to just note for the record some implementation strategies that I've heard that I think these are in here, but these are all from public comment, either written or this evening, and I just want to make sure we capture all of these for our next steps. One was about tree removal and some issues with what kind of policies and process there is for people that want to remove trees, what the justification is for removing trees, and how the city and neighborhood associations interact on those rules. I think that one needs to go on the list. Education we've talked about several times, to make sure that one is a top priority. There's been a few people that have made comments, both in person and in writing, about the update to the tree canopy assessment. And I think we need to make sure as part of our implementation strategies that we have a very clear plan with an underlying set of reasoning for what our frequency is going to be and how that's done. Is Forterra an implementation strategy? And I will admit, I did spend a few moments looking it up while I was sitting here, and I should have done that sooner. But I kind of understand what they are and what they do, and I think it would be worthy of looking into what successes other communities have had working with them. It seems like an implementation strategy. Okay, let's put that one on the list. And then I think visiting the existing ordinances that we have to protect steep slopes and landslide hazard areas. I know that there is a lot of existing language around those. Perhaps that addresses a lot of the concerns about trees. So maybe the implementation strategy is just to look at it and confirm. But I think that one should be on the list as well. Then the other thing that I would like to encourage is, and perhaps I don't remember very clearly, but I think there was some written comments about this, and I think it's a good question. It seems to me that we discussed that other communities don't necessarily very frequently have a urban forest management plan, but there are a couple of local examples. I think as you move this forward to the council, it would be valuable to preemptively do a little bit of background on what those other communities have, and maybe make a phone call and see what they have to say about it. I think that might head off a few questions that the council might have. Okay, beyond that, I don't have any other comments about the plan. Does anyone else?
I just had a comment or two. I just wanted to thank the public for coming tonight and attending our meeting, and I always benefit from everything you have to say, and I'm educated every time I come here, and I make notes and I remember who says what, and so I will be remembering your comments when it comes to implementation. I also wanted to acknowledge that I received the email from Clara Delshad and Mary Johnson and received their comments and their grave concerns about the implementation of our current tree retention policy and how we are not really standing by it, and their concerns for trees that are dying due to lack of water, and I think that's something in implementation we need to address. Also, how this plan coexists with our stormwater plan, and that we need to make sure that those two plans don't fight with each other, and we keep that foremost on our mind because one helps the other. So I just wanted to thank the public for their emails and their comments tonight, and throughout this whole process. I learn from you guys every time, and I remember everything you say, and I take notes, and I will be remembering all of this when it comes to implementation, so thank you so much.
Is there a second to the call for the question?
Second.
Thank you. So the question has been called. Let's see if I can get this correct. We've moved and seconded to recommend to the City Council the approval of the Urban Forest Management Plan as drafted in Exhibit 3 and further amended by the Planning Commission in Exhibit 2 of the June 20th, 2019 packet materials, and in addition, the two amendments that were made this evening that were passed. And I think that's it.
Yep.
Oh, but the two exhibits include the adjustments to one of the amendments and then the addition of Exhibit 4 for clarification. All right. Those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Those opposed, no. It's passed. The commission is unanimous in recommending this to move forward to the City Council.
I want to thank staff and the Planning Commission. Some of us go clear back to this urban forest plan when I served on the Parks and Rec Commission, and it's great to see this move forward. And one of the things came out, we have groups like the Friends of Sammamish, and we have Sammamish Friends and a bunch of other groups, but maybe we need to get a new group together called Friends of Trees.
I think you could be both the president and the founding member. All right. Kelly, do we have anything else this evening? All right. Could someone move to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
We moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.